So, ladies and gentlemen, this is time for the inaugural lecture given this year by Dr. Arthur Eyffinger on the Hague Academy at 100, its Rationale, role and records. Just a short introduction to Dr. Arthur Eyffinger. Everybody knows him here in the Netherlands and probably in the international legal world, but well, perhaps not all of you. He's a classicist. He has got a PhD obtained in Amsterdam in 1981 and legal historian. From 1970 to 1985, he was researcher at the Grotius Institute of the Royal Netherlands Academy and the editor of literary, legal and political tracts of Hugo Grotius. He was co-founder of the Grotiana Foundation in 1978. From 1987 to 2003, he was head librarian of the International Court of Justice and published monographs on the Peace Palace in 1988, the ICJ in 1996, and the first Hague Peace Conference in 1999. In 2004, he founded a research center on international law and peace studies related to the judicial capital, JudiCap, and published treatises on the Carnegie Foundation in 2004. The second Hague Peace Conference in 2007, Bertha von Suttner in 2013, the Institute and The Hague, 2019, and a major study on Tobias Asser in 2019. Currently, he prepares a trilogy on the history of the World Court, 2022-2025. Thank you so much, Dr. Eyffinger, to give the first real lecture of this centenary here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for these kind and generous words. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our discipline has not been overly blessed with acclaim from the world at large. It has forever been under scrutiny and a subject of conceptual doubt by so many. Politicians like to refer to it, to its precepts and its general principles. But then history tells us that only in the wake of political classicism, not on the eve, progress is being made. It takes some courage to insist on precepts and concepts as the rule of law, social justice, and peace. But then this is what the Academy is all about. It's an institute for critical inquiry on the basis of intellectual acumen and above all, an open mind. It's not a school. It's not a doctrine. It relishes precisely in the choc des opinions, in the clashing views of cultures and generations. It's an academic institution, but that is not to say that it ignores the demands of life. In its social encounter, it invariably insists on the call of the human conscience, the moral stand. The 400 odd volumes of the Recueil des Cours comprehend all the answers the advocates of the law have given in the face of a century of clashing ideologies, social strife, in the midst of astonishing technological progress and appalling moral stagnation. In the days the academy was opened, millions and millions of refugees were crisscrossing Europe from the Baltic to the Balkans in search of a new identity and a home. One single look around will tell us that this jubilee doesn't call so much for congratulations as rather for determination. Noblesse oblige. This particular institution is on the brink of its second century, but the concept as such has a long tradition of 2.5 millennia and the highest of pedagogies. It was Plato himself who at some stage invited kindred minds and pupils to an olive grove near Athens for an open discourse. Aristotle joined this for 20 years, and the dialogue gave us some of the most penetrating and most charming discourses and dialogues in world literature. 200 years later, the academy had slided down to skepticism and was headed by a certain Carneades, the Machiavellian of his day and age, whom Grotius in his Prolegomena in 1625 pitched as his fictive opponent in his advocacy of the law. Another 2 centuries later, Cicero gained the first inklings of natural law at the academy in Athens. And the concept of oikeiosis, which Marcus Aurelius sought to implement in society. At the end of 9 centuries, the academy was discontinued by the edict of an emperor we venerate on another account, Justinian, but only to resurface a couple of centuries later as the first token of intellectual renaissance in Europe in the new Athens, Medici, Florence, in the days of Ficino and Pico, when Raphael produced his monumental mural, The School of Athens. Hence, the idea of an academy conquered Europe. Colbert and Richelieu created academies in France. Locke and Newton flourished at their counterparts in London. Leibniz founded academies in Berlin and St. Petersburg. And in 1872, the idea came our way when Caspar Bloomsbury came up with a project for a Academie des Völkerrechts. That Compagnie de Savants finally opted for a different name, Institut. And it is this Institut de Droit International which is a major sheet anchor of your institution. From its gremium, from its presidents, the curatorium has been elected. From its membres et associés, its lecturers. And their pupils came here as students at the academy. There was little coincidence there. And the same held good for the location. For the academy was never projected as an autonomous institution. It was from the first meant to be incorporated in l'œuvre de la Hague. It came about in the days of the First Hague Peace Conference, when the so-called civilized nations of the world rejected the idea of obligatory arbitration the same way they would later, in 1907 and 1920, dismiss the idea of compulsory education. But as an alternative route, it was projected to have an advisory team of scholars at the help of the powers to complement the conventions of the conferences and the awards of the permanent court and its tribunals with doctrine and put them to the test. It was dismissed, but it inevitably resurfaced in 1907. At that stage, the powers were invited themselves to select a team of scholars. Statutes were drawn up. But then it was claimed that it should be an individual, an independent body, and not linked to the powers. And obviously, the powers profited from this perception to ignore the idea again. It was picked up by pacifists here in The Hague, who projected the idea of a university and 2 years courses for international law and international and political sciences. Here, in the June area, what we now call the international zone. It labored from a couple of handicaps. It was far too ambitious, it was far too costly. And the idea of a university ran into the suspicion of established university centers. So sorry. Yeah. It needed a very pragmatic mind to get the thing afloat again. In 1862, a brilliant young lawyer from Amsterdam stunned the first conference of the Association des Sciences Sociales of Auguste Couvreur in Brussels with a number of very provocative theses on private international law. On the spot, Tobias Asser struck a chord for life with Gustave Rollin-Jacquemin from Ghent and John Westlake from Cambridge. And when 3 years later, Auguste Couveur's society and yearbooks went down in French-German rivalry, to keep the torch aflame, they created the first ever journal of international law, the Revue de droit international et de législation comparée. When after the French-Prussian War and the famous arbitration in Geneva, major legal luminaries like de Savigny, Magny, and Caspar Bloomsbury invited these angry young men to create the Institute. 20 years later, Asser, at the head of the private section of the Institute, founded the Conférence de la Haye. 5 years later, he was at the head of the Silver Jubilee of the Institute at The Hague, which discussed arbitration in politics and adjured on the very day that at St. Petersburg, a Tsar, a cornered Tsar, badly in need of a moratorium in the relentless armaments race, came up with a prescript for peace. In subsequent months, his Council of State, Theodore Martens, rerouted those illusionary projects into a decent program on the basis of the research projects of the Institute. Martens, in a wonderful quid pro quo, then invited Asser to organize the peace conference in The Hague, and in exchange offered him the position of single arbitrator in the whaling and sealing dispute with the USA. It worked wonders both ways, and it earned Asser the lasting reward of the State Department in Washington. In 1907, Asser helped his friend Louis Renault to the Nobel Peace Prize. And 4 years later, Renault and Leon Kahn reciprocated. Asser, an inspired teacher, then voted half of his prize money to the project of the Academy. He hauled in more budget, created a think team in the Netherlands of politicians and university dons, and then turned to Elijah Root and James Brown Scott at the head of the newly founded Carnegie Endowment. They drew a hard bargain, the Americans. But Asser won the day by cutting down the project of a university to summer courses for postgraduates. It substantially reduced the budget, disarmed university centers, and brought their university dons in the bargain for their summer courses. The Academy was supposed to be opened in 1915 in the high days of the Third Hague Peace Conference. 5 years later, 2 members of the Advisory Committee of Jurists who assembled here in The Hague to prepare the statute of the court recommended the League of Nations to speed up the project. These 2 members were Elijah Root and James Brown Scott. The Academy was opened on 14 Juillet 1923, when 350 students, every 10th of them a female, attended 28 courses. It was an instant and lasting success. Within a week, James Brown Scott was at the head of an amicale, which turned into the formidable AAA, the Association of Auditeurs et Anciens Auditeurs, which organized itself in national affiliations, professional groups of attorneys of law and university dons, organized conferences, yearly conferences worldwide, and came up with yearbooks. To exemplify, in the mid-50s, Daniel Vigne, Georges Sell, and the legendary Madame Bastide organized and created the Annuaire Français de Droit International. There was no much incident in this success. It was a golden formula they had hit on. The Academy was steered by the curatorium in which the presidents of the Institute were at the head. Membres and associés secured electors. But these fellows were the most likely persons to be elected to the International Court of Justice, to the World Court, so to speak. As judge, as a deputy judge, a judge ad hoc, or to appear before the bench as agent or counsel. Their presence was a major asset for the Academy. Statistics are impressive. Some 350 members of the Institute produced more than 700 courses of the 1400 at the Academy. Out of the 100 members of the curatorium, 90 were selected from the Institute. 80 judges were members of the Institute. And they, again, got a number of courses. Some went all the way. In 1923, Philip Jessup entered as a student, gave his first course in 29, returned 3 times, was elected at the Institute, at the Curatorium, and at the ICJ. He went all the way, the Grand Slam, so to speak. The same held good for Roberto Ago, who came in 29 to hear Philip Jessup. He served the court for 16 years and the Curatorium for 30 years. The same held good for some 25 judges. Each and every year, the administration registered 2 or 3 later celebrities. And the same, no doubt, will hold good for these winter courses. There will be 1 or 2 mystery guests among you. But it is of the essence that we keep to this, what I would call relay race of eminence, estafette d'excellence. Some of you will argue, but that's half of the story. But what about the private domain? That's an intriguing story, because Asser, the head of the private section of the Institute, was in the best tradition of the so-called elegant school of the Netherlands, Bankershoek and de Voetui, who came up with the idea of comitas. And as it was said, they had frayé le chemin, they had swept the path. Asser founded the Conférence de la Haye, which became the opening of l'œuvre de la Haye. He handpicked Albéric Rollin, first as librarian, and then for 15 years as Secretary General of the Academy. But then, these Hague conferences were never uncontested. One might recall the discourse between Renaud and Asser on methodology and general principles. What we saw during the interbellum period at the Academy was an intense discourse and polemic on all the things which had preoccupied Pasquale Mancini and all the others: domicile and nationality, renvoi, execution of foreign judgment. At the Academy, there were polemics between autonomist and anti-autonomist, between universalist and particularist. All this never stopped until in 1947, Max Gutzwiller, a Swiss scholar, came up with the idea to start all again. Attempts to revive the Academy in the mid-20s, 2 congresses in 1925 and 28, met with lukewarm response. But in 1951, a first new conference in the new style was launched. New statutes were drawn up, and in 1955, a permanent secretariat here in The Hague was founded. Ever since, it has been an absolute story of success, in which the 2 institutions, Academy and Hague Conference, as Professor Stuikerman said, operated like sœurs jumelles, like twin sisters. And in joint efforts and an admirable synergy, they created projects together which ended up in some 40 conventions signed by some 100 powers. The Academy and the Hague Conference together became global players. And it is from these circles that in 2005 the idea came to open a new Academy Hall. The history of the Academy can be divided in 3 periods. The first covers the interbellum period. Now, each and every generation has its expectations and illusions. but no generation probably experienced such a drama as the interwar thing. It all started on the highest of tenors. Versailles was the opening of a new era. The League, the World Court, the collective security system were all daring new experiments. It was felt that the law had finally come into its own. And the Locarno treaties, the Bryan-Kellogg Pact, the wide calls for a codification conference only confirmed that idea. At the Academy, they worked together in courses to discuss the League, the Covenant, the mandate system, the Labour Office, matters of reparations, matters of minorities, discrimination. They worked to come up with new ideas for the rights and duties of states, and finally solve that riddle of the Advisory Committee of Jurists, the legal equality of all states, which had now been rerouted into the eternal rivalry between the Council and the General Assembly. All this ended with the Wall Street clash. All this ended with the Wall Street clash. And in its slipstream, civil war in China, in Brazil, and in Spain. The world of the law realized that they hadn't slain the Leviathan as yet. War, aggression, and neutrality were still around in spite of all things. 6,000 students had attended 400 courses, collected proudly in 70 volumes, but it hadn't stopped war. San Francisco came as a new dawn, and no one felt like looking backwards. The more so as monumental new challenges, all of a global nature, faced them. Human rights issues, concerns for human rights issues, and humanitarian affairs were laid down in the declarations for human rights, in the Genocide Convention, in the creation of human rights commissions, in the Geneva Conventions, and in the Universal Declaration and the Declaration of Human Rights. At the Academy, 3 things had changed. First of all, courses were now also given in English, up to par with the French. It opened a whole new reservoir of lecturers and students. Second, the Institute was facing a keen competitor, the International Law Commission, under the auspices of the General Assembly. It operated in the same arena, but from a different perspective, not a scholarly perspective, but a political perspective. It could have led to confrontation, but the outcome was a blessing in disguise. For they worked together in wonderful synergy to prepare the first major conventions of the UN era on the laws of the sea, on diplomatic and consular law, and the jewel in the crown, the law of treaties of 1969. Of the 230 members of the International Law Commission, 90 joined the Institute. They gave all in all 130 courses here. And if the position of membership of the Commission and membership of the bench here at The Hague was incompatible, some 30 judges upon their election had a rich experience at the Commission, which added to the wisdom of the court. The third aspect concerned finances. Up to 1945, the Carnegie Endowment had generously sponsored the Academy. All that came to a halt. And in the end, it created a new ideology at the curatorium. It overhauled all its former policies and came up with new ideas. The first was to upgrade the certificate of attendance into a diploma on the basis of stern exams. The second was, introduced by Jessup 5 years later, to create advanced courses, especially for the diploma holders, centers of excellence. And they turned into what we would call the laboratories of the law, the Centre d'études, and its reporters and their teams have over the past 70 years virtually touched, repeatedly tackled all the major urgent issues of our discipline. For all this, the curatorium was taken by surprise by the decolonization process. It had been stuck in its Eurocentrism. It was the wreckage of the Southwest Africa judgment of the court in 1966, which opened the eyes for the curatorium. And a year later, a study group with Wolfgang Friedman, Jennings and Oda came up with the idea for external program. They went on a missionary tour in a desperate effort to preserve the unity and the harmony of the law. They turned, like Mohammed and the mountain, they turned to Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And in '73, on the golden jubilee of the Academy, the curatorium felt it was up to par again, and in a position to face whatever was ahead. That change came with the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Overnight, the International Court, which had been virtually disregarded for 20 years, heated up again. At UN headquarters, a decade of international law was acclaimed. And to the Academy, all this was linked to one single person, Boutros Ghali. Upon his election, he announced in 1992 the agenda for peace. And a year later, he named The Hague, the judicial capital of the world, as he called it, the proper domicile for the criminal tribunal for former Yugoslavia. Overnight, it changed the status, the prestige, the outlook and the infrastructure of The Hague. Within a decade, a whole range of new courts and tribunals, research institutions, regional organizations and NGOs gravitated to The Hague. The discourse was extended towards criminal law, chemical weapons and European integration. Thousands and thousands of experts crowded the streets of The Hague. The PCA, the Sleeping Beauty, that had been dormant for 50 years, got a new lease on life and became a global entity in commercial and mixed arbitration. The Dutch Foreign Ministry, headed by men like Max van der Stoel and Peter Kooijmans, decided to invest deeply. All new projects were put up. And one of the major things and token of the quality of this project is this Academy Hall. The curatorium almost reinvented itself. It cut down its maximum age and terms of membership. It came up with a range of new projects. I can't mention them all, but the first female Secretary General of the Academy, Madame Bordeaux, came up with human rights courses and the idea of courts and moot courts for legal professionals. Her successor, Yves Daudet, came up with the Livre de Poche. And under the present Secretary General, we have seen these winter courses and moot courts, French moot courts on criminal law along with the ICC. Gender ratio was another thing. At the first session in 1923, there were only 35 women. As we speak now, the female contingent, so to speak, has long surpassed that of the males. The first woman to lecture at the Academy was an American political scientist in 1927, and it took long to get any progress. It started with Madame Bastide and Jungfrau Binschleder. Then came Mevrouw Diedericks-Versor, and even Dame Rosalind Higgins had something of a pioneer yet. Even so, as we speak, 5 members of the curatorium are women, are ladies, and one of them a judge of the court. In fact, one can say that the Academy is better positioned than ever to face whatever is ahead. And you students, you never had it so good. The Academy lives on 2 levels, so to speak: education and research. The main asset of the education, of course, are these courses. The exchange of view between generations and cultures in the immediate vicinity of all these institutions. This is where what I call the relay race of eminence is all about. Turning to research, that of course is in the Recueil des Cours, the 420 volumes so far. And the pièce de résistance of these courses are the so-called general courses, first opened in 1929. Everything which was important to the law over the past century is found there. Many of these courses became instant classics, and most of their authors are legendary figures. It reads like a gallery of heroes from which each and of us can pick his own dream team and compose his own canon. Human rights, a discourse which probably started in Valladolid in 50-50, went through all these phases, and you find them in the Recueil des Cours. The law of the sea, which started with Grotius and Selden, and went through all these phases and all these technological problems, which provisionally ended in the Montego Bay Convention and the foundation of the Special Tribunal in Hamburg. In the 19th century, the late 19th century, it was held that economy was the key to peace. They proved the point with the First World War and the recession. And more than 100 courses in the academy tell that story. But as we speak now, our preoccupation is rather to balance economy and ecology in new concepts like sustainable development, to keep up biodiversity. Right now, all four elements are under acute attack. Drinking water is becoming a rare commodity. Fresh air is being polluted. The earth is struggling to nourish 8 billion of us and heating up under the fire of our industry. Benjamin Cardozo told us, the life precedes the law, but we can't hold back spring. It is of the essence for the law to keep the pulse of society, and especially an innovative institute like the Academy has to be very keen in this aspect. It operates on the crossroads of lex lata and lex ferenda. The overall conclusion of 100 years is very positive. It's a wonderful and very valuable institution. There are disadvantages, of course. It has always been said that the Academy and the Curatorium has been too kind for the International Court, treated them with silver gloves. The same with the powers. There is always some bias. Some celebrities came 5 times, others you didn't see. But on the whole, it's a wonderful tradition. I have 2 propositions or desiderata to make, so to speak, to conclude. First of all, what you see in the statute of the court, and we saw it on the screen, is that it is meant to promote international law and annex sciences. It was a very natural approach in these early days because it reproduced, reflected the composition of the delegations at the peace conference. Over the past century, all these ministry officials, diplomats, political scientists, and even military cadre have frequented our courses and been warmly welcomed, but their voice has rarely been heard. Wouldn't it be a idea every now and then to insert a course in which we invite one of representative of these annex sciences to give their perspective on the law? Second, nothing has intrigued me over the past year so much as what we find in the tradition of the courses, the segments of the court. Private versus public, municipal versus international. It gave rise to wonderful polemics as between Triple, Kelsen and Ancelotti in the 20s, and later on Ago, Spaduti, Battifol and Riphagen. Again, if only in justice to modern realities, it would be something, perhaps, to create a task force to see what we can do to have all the perspectives before our eyes and all the options, keep all the options open. In 1973, Jennings here on the Golden Jubilee told the Charter and all that, it's outdated. We have to rethink. If anything, it's up to the Academy. My last word is, as it should be, to the next generation. Over the past century, right on time, over the past century, the AAA has been a major part of the backbone of the Academy. In a curious paradox, it went all down with the opening of the era of communication, when all the former models, modules and parameters were simply abandoned. With all the challenges ahead, we can't afford not to mobilize all the auxiliary forces. You, the next generation, should be involved again in institutional national affiliations as an other discourse to help the others. International law has meandered through the past century, forever faced with strong headwinds. It has plied its sails and tacked its course. But that was never for the lack of a clear destination. That goal was eminently defined and elegantly worded at the opening of the Academy in 1922 by its first president, Léon Kal, in the lines, "Un jour, le droit sera le souverain du monde." That must be our motto. And I would invite you to repeat that sentence with me, with full conviction. Un jour, le droit sera le souverain du monde. Encore! Thank you, Mr. President.